Ali Khamenei has stood at the heart of the Islamic Republic since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, playing a pivotal role in both the militarization of the state and the consolidation of near-absolute authority in the office of the Supreme Leader. He is the architect of the rise of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, shaping it into an instrument of control and regional influence, and has made Iran's nuclear capabilities central to its strategy for national security and deterrence. As a pragmatic hardliner, he has sidelined leftists, moderate clerics and dissidents, while occasionally loosening his grip when regime legitimacy or cohesion has been at stake. Through a steady centralization of power over 4 decades, beginning as a trusted confidant of Ruhollah Khomeini and member of the Revolutionary Council, followed by a 2-term presidency from 1981 to 1989, and culminating in his elevation to supreme leader despite lacking formal qualifications. Khamenei has shaped Iran's revolutionary regime in his image. A cleric of high institutional rank among the 12 Shia, Khamenei is generally addressed with the honorific Ayatollah, a title that is known to belong to more than 100 other living Shi'i clerics. His formal title as Iran's political head of state is Rahbar, meaning leader or supreme leader. Khamenei was born on April 19, 1939, in the city of Mashhad, an important religious center for the Twelver. Shias is the burial place of the 8th Imam Ali al-Rida. He later began his advanced religious studies at Qom under the most prominent Shi'i scholars of the day, including Ruhollah Khomeini. From 1963, he was actively involved in protests against the monarchy, for which he was imprisoned several times by Iran's security services. Khamenei remained closely associated with the exiled Khomeini during this time and immediately after the latter's return to Iran in 1979 was appointed to the Revolutionary Council. After its dissolution, he became Deputy Minister of Defense and Khomeini's personal representative on the Supreme Defense Council. For a brief period, he commanded the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a foreign policy hawk. He was a key negotiator in the Iran hostage crisis. Khamenei was immersed in the new republic's politics from the start. A fiery orator in support of Khomeini and an ardent advocate of the concept of vilayat-e-faqih, governance by the religious jurist, Khamenei was among the founding members of the loyalist Islamic Republican Party, IRP. He was injured in 1981 in one of a series of terrorist bombings that devastated the IRP's upper echelon. Following the death of Prester Mohammed Ali Rajai and the IRP's Secretary General in another such blast later that year, Khamenei was appointed as the IRP's Secretary General. Within weeks he became the IRP's candidate for the presidency, an office that had previously been off limits for clergy. Khamenei was elected president in October 1981 and re-elected in 1985. The presidency was a largely ceremonial role. During his 2 terms, most executive authority being vested in the Prime Minister. After his own nominee for Prime Minister was rejected by the left-leaning Majlis Parliament, he reluctantly appointed Mir Hossein Mousavi as Prime Minister with the urging of Khomeini himself. The relationship between Khamenei and Mousavi was bitter, leading them to butt heads both during and after Khamenei's presidency. As Khomeini's health declined, and it remained unclear who would be both qualified to succeed him and sympathetic to his vision of vilayat-e-faqih, in 1989, he appointed a council to revise the constitution. Its work had not been completed by the time of his death in June, and it appointed Khamenei as the next Rahbar or leader. However, Khamenei did not meet the qualifications. He was not yet a senior cleric, having been accorded only the somewhat less lofty title of Hujjatul Islam. Moreover, he favored a strongly centralized government under the leader, in part to forestall the influence of foreign powers in domestic politics. Changes to the constitution, approved in a referendum in July, loosened the qualifications, eliminated the post of prime minister, and strengthened the presidency, and gave the leader significant power to oversee and intervene in political affairs. In the early 1990s, Khamenei enjoyed a good working relationship with Prester Hashemi Rafsanjani, another revolutionary figure with whom he was close. His relations with reformist President Mohammad Khatami, however, who served from 1997 to 2005, were strained. Against Khamenei's conservatism and deep distrust of the United States, Khatami had a liberalizing agenda and favored rapprochement with the United States. Although Khamenei projected an official neutrality, in the 2005 presidential elections, he showed subtle favor for conservative candidates, and his son Mojtaba was alleged to have played a role in the surprise victory of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, a relatively unknown conservative former mayor of Tehran. Many found Ahmadinejad's success surprising, and it was clear that he would not have been elected without their support. During his first term in office, Ahmadinejad endeared himself to Khamenei through his bellicose stance toward opponents both at home and abroad, particularly by flaunting the nation's nuclear program. Nonetheless, the two at times found themselves at odds, particularly as they engaged in a power struggle in Ahmadinejad's second term. Khamenei's leadership saw its strongest challenge during the presidential election of 2009, when Ahmadinejad faced a surprisingly formidable opponent in Mousavi, Khamenei's former Prime Minister 1981-1989, around whom the country's reformist contingent had coalesced. Although pre-election polls had shown a tight contest, Ahmadinejad was declared the victor with more than 60% of the vote, as the result was quickly endorsed by Khamenei. Suspecting fraud, the opposition rejected the result and gathered to protest, staging massive popular demonstrations in Tehran and elsewhere. In some instances, protesters shouted slogans calling for Khamenei's downfall. In the media, the protests were dubbed the Green Movement, after the color associated with Mousavi's campaign. Although the first protests were largely peaceful, police and paramilitary groups were deployed to suppress them. A handful of protesters and members of the opposition were killed, and many more were arrested. Following nearly a week of protests, Khamenei issued his first public response to the unrest, again supporting Ahmadinejad as victory and warning the opposition against further demonstrations. Despite the government's attempts at suppression, protests continued for the rest of the year. Relations between Khamenei and Ahmadinejad soured during the latter's second term as president. It was believed that Ahmadinejad was trying to wrest power from the clerical establishment. Tensions came into public view in April 2011, when Ahmadinejad refused to report to cabinet meetings or his presidential office for 11 days after Khamenei vetoed his dismissal of the Minister of Intelligence. He returned to work under the threat of impeachment. Ahmadinejad took another provocative step in May, when he named himself acting Minister of Oil, before the clerical establishment could intervene. In March 2012, Ahmadinejad was summoned by the Majlis for an unprecedented session of questioning over his policies and his power struggles with Khamenei. Ahmadinejad finished his term in 2013, but was barred from running again in 2017. Under Ahmadinejad's successor, the centrist cleric Hassan Rouhani, Iran changed direction in foreign affairs, moving rapidly toward reducing friction with the West. International negotiations toward an agreement to end Iran's nuclear research programs in exchange for the lifting of sanctions began within several months of Rouhani's election. In 2013, throughout the negotiation process, Khamenei maintained a skeptical public posture, voicing objections about aspects of the agreement that he saw as possible infringements on Iran's sovereignty. Nevertheless, a final agreement, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was reached in 2015 with Khamenei's approval. Khamenei's leadership saw its strongest challenge during the presidential election of 2009, when Ahmadinejad faced a surprisingly formidable opponent in Mousavi, Khamenei's former Prime Minister 1981-1989, around whom the country's reformist contingent had coalesced. Although pre-election polls had shown a tight contest, Ahmadinejad was declared the victor with more than 60% of the vote, as the result was quickly endorsed by Khamenei. Suspecting fraud, the opposition rejected the result and gathered to protest, staging massive popular demonstrations in Tehran and elsewhere. In some instances, protesters shouted slogans calling for Khamenei's downfall. In the media, the protests were dubbed the Green Movement, after the color associated with Mousavi's campaign. Although the first protests were largely peaceful, Police and paramilitary groups were deployed to suppress them. A handful of protesters and members of the opposition were killed, and many more were arrested. Following nearly a week of protests, Khamenei issued his first public response to the unrest, again supporting Ahmadinejad's victory and warning the opposition against further demonstrations. Despite the government's attempts at suppression, protests continued for the rest of the year. Relations between Khamenei and Ahmadinejad soured during the latter's second term as president. It was believed that Ahmadinejad was trying to wrest power from the clerical establishment. Tensions came into public view in April 2011, when Ahmadinejad refused to report to cabinet meetings or his presidential office for 11 days after Khamenei vetoed his dismissal of the Minister of Intelligence. He returned to work under the threat of impeachment. Ahmadinejad took another provocative step in May, when he named himself acting Minister of Oil, before the clerical establishment could intervene. In March 2012, Ahmadinejad was summoned by the Majlis for an unprecedented session of questioning over his policies and his power struggles with Khamenei. Ahmadinejad finished his term in 2013, but was barred from running again in 2017. Under Ahmadinejad's successor, the centrist cleric Hassan Rouhani, Iran changed direction in foreign affairs, moving rapidly toward reducing friction with the West. International negotiations toward an agreement to end Iran's nuclear research programs in exchange for the lifting of sanctions began within several months of Rouhani's election. In 2013, throughout the negotiation process, Khamenei maintained a skeptical public posture, voicing objections about aspects of the agreement that he saw as possible infringements on Iran's sovereignty. Nevertheless, a final agreement, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was reached in 2015 with Khamenei's approval. Like the 2020 parliamentary elections, the presidential election of 2021 was also restrictive. The only high-profile candidate allowed to run was Ebrahim Raisi, a senior prosecutor for the regime who had led the criticism against Rouhani for conceding too much in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. He won by an overwhelming margin, but record low turnout underscored the fact that voters felt they were not offered a real alternative. With Raisi at the ready, Khamenei promoted a resistance economy and regime security. Raisi and the Majlis implemented austerity measures while seeking stronger ties with neighboring countries. Greater focus on security was meant to pacify growing restlessness amid the economic uncertainty, but in fact, it stoked unrest with its strict and excessive enforcement. The death of a Kurdish young woman, Gina Mahsa Amini, while in custody for improper dress, served as a catalyst for widespread and sustained demonstrations in late 2022. The incident amplified several grievances against the regime, including its subjugation of women, its maltreatment of minorities, and its prioritization of regime ideology over Iranians' welfare. The setbacks at home were soon afterward met with setbacks in Iran's foreign affairs. For years, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had expanded its regional reach considerably, beginning with alliances established in the 1980s with Hezbollah in Lebanon and the regime of Hafez al-Assad in Syria. With the fall of Saddam Hussein in neighboring Iraq in 2003, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps began coordinating with militias in Iraq and operating unimpeded from Iran to the Mediterranean Sea. The individual outfits within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps-led alliance, which collectively came to be called the Axis of Resistance, each operated in their own self-interest, but their cohesion was made possible primarily through the efforts, training, and investment of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. By the early 2020s, Iran's allies were the dominant factions governing Syria, Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, and Yemen, and members of the Axis were coordinating on an unprecedented level, including Yemen's Houthi fighters training with Iran-backed militias in Iraq and leaders of the Gaza Strip's Hamas and Lebanon's Hezbollah, managing a joint operations center in Beirut. When Hamas and other Palestinian militants attacked Israel on October 7, 2023, they acted without coordination with other members of the Axis of Resistance. Still, Hezbollah in Lebanon stepped up its cross-border attacks on Israel in solidarity with Hamas and after Israel launched an offensive in the Gaza Strip in response to the October 7 attack. The Houthi rebels in Yemen began attacking Israel as well. In April 2024, after Israeli forces killed senior officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds force in Damascus, Khamenei ordered retaliatory strikes against Israel, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps sent drones and missiles into Israeli airspace for the first time in the two countries' history. As Iran and its allies faced setbacks in their fight with Israel, it became increasingly important for Iran to alleviate its isolation. Raisi renewed his outreach to neighboring countries with foreign trips in late April and into May. But on May 19th, following a visit to Azerbaijan, Raisi's helicopter crashed and he was found dead in the wreckage the following day. His death at such a tumultuous moment left many questions about Iran's future. Khamenei was aging, and Raisi was widely believed to be one of only two contenders positioned to succeed him as supreme leader. The other contender was Khamenei's son, Mojtaba. The election to replace Raisi saw the most reform-oriented candidate to win the presidency since Khatami. The fact that Masoud Pezeshkian even qualified to contest the election was seen by observers as an attempt by Khamenei to improve the legitimacy of the government. Given the level of unrest that took place under Raisi, Pezeshkian's election also signaled Khamenei's willingness to re-enter negotiations with the West over nuclear policy, a key stance of Pezeshkian's presidential campaign. In August, Pezeshkian appointed Mohammad Javad Zarif, the lead negotiator of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as his vice president of strategy. But Pezeshkian had hardly taken office before Khamenei's aggressive stance on foreign policy put Pezeshkian's agenda for rapprochement on the back burner. Just hours after attending Pezeshkian's inauguration in July, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated by a covert Israeli operation in Tehran. According to the New York Times, Khamenei ordered a direct attack on Israel in retaliation, but after the shock of Haniyeh's assassination had worn off, the risk of regional escalation appeared to deter Iran from responding. But when Israeli forces killed Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah and one of Iran's most important allies, Iran responded by launching 180 ballistic missiles toward Israel. Conflict between Israel and Hezbollah continued to escalate nonetheless, and by the time a ceasefire was concluded in November, the Lebanese militant group had been severely weakened. Its retreat from the Syrian civil war in turn allowed Syrian rebels to swiftly topple Bashar al-Assad, the son and successor of Hafez al-Assad, and put in place a transitional government in December that was firmly opposed to Iranian influence in Syria. The losses were severe setbacks for the axis of resistance and Iran's influence in the Middle East. After the return of Trump to the United States presidency in January 2025, the United States renewed threats to hold Iran accountable for the activities of its allies, including the Houthi rebels, who continued to launch attacks on Israel and threaten ships in the Red Sea. Meanwhile, Trump sent a letter to Khamenei in March, requesting negotiations to dismantle Iran's nuclear program and also limit its regional influence and its missile range. Khamenei publicly rebuffed the request, dismissing the proposed talks as bullying, Iran into surrendering some of its defensive capabilities. Nevertheless, within weeks, negotiations between the two countries began with Oman as the mediating party. But despite all the negotiations, they were not successful, and on June 13, 2025, the aggressor Israel attacked Iran, which lasted 12 days. Despite all the fears, the United States was forced to intervene in the military actions, in which they struck strategically important military bases in Iran, which led to large-scale destruction. After the intervention of many countries, they managed to stop the military actions and concluded peace for an indefinite period. I think Iran will still show its power in the near future.